University in Florence and Coastal Carolina University in Conway, South Carolina. Tonight we're joined by 4 Republican gubernatorial hopefuls. They hope to be South Carolina's next governor. The primary is next Tuesday, 1 week from tonight. Our candidates include Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer, 3rd District Congressman Gresham Barrett, State Attorney General Henry McMaster, and State Representative Nikki Haley from Lexington. Please give the candidates a warm Florence, South Carolina welcome. Tonight's debate also features a panel of esteemed journalists in our part of the state. They include Harry Logan. He works in the Office of Public and Community Affairs here at Francis Marion, following his retirement last year as the editor of the Florence Morning News. Harry is also the immediate past president of the South Carolina Press Association. Joining Harry on the panel tonight is his former colleague, Jackie Torek. She is the current Metro editor of the Morning News. And then the third member of our panel is my colleague and WBTW News 13 anchor and reporter, Rusty Ray. Please welcome our panel as well. This debate that's coming up 1 week before the big primary will focus on job creation and building long-term economic growth across all of South Carolina. Part 1 involves questions from our media panel. Each candidate will have the chance to answer 3 questions at least posed by each panelist. The candidates have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the question when it's their time to go first. The other 3 candidates then have 30 seconds for rebuttal. We had a series of coin tosses earlier tonight to determine the order in which the candidates will answer the panel's Voice of the Voter questions, and Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer will answer the first question. Harry Logan will ask it. Harry?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bauer, a recent poll by the Morning News and Francis Marion University among registered voters in the PD found that jobs and the economy were their top priorities, with little or no concern about welfare. Is your attention on the welfare question only a hot-button issue to appeal to voters in the GOP primary?
Absolutely not. The people of South Carolina know that next year we're going to have a record drop in the amount of revenue that we have in this state. And so not only do we have to create new opportunities, but we're going to have to make up shortfalls. We're going to have to make tough decisions. And so I don't have any political advisors. I decide what I think is important to people of South Carolina by being out on the street like I was this morning at 7 a.m. where people can pull over and ask me anything. And we're going to have to make some tough cuts next year. And so we've got to look at every program out there and decide what is effective and what's not effective. And so we know there are programs right now. The fastest growing segment in the budget right now is the welfare rolls. It's bigger than what we spend on whether you look at military spending. The fastest growing segment is welfare right now. Nobody wants to talk about it. We have no way to pay for it anymore. So I think we've got to address that. But more than that, we've also got to talk about ways to bring business to South Carolina. And out of everybody sitting on this panel, I'm the only one that's still running a business. None of these other folks are running a business. I deal with it every day. I see how difficult it is to pay the taxes that are continually placed on me, to see the way to get business permits now. More and more government bureaucrats make it more difficult to try to do things that make it easier to run my business. And so every time I turn around, the things that made me successful as a young man and even as an older person in business are now being taken away, and it's becoming more and more difficult for private business owners to make a living in this state.
Mr. Barrett, you got 30 seconds.
Well, I do agree that I think the number one issue is jobs. I say on the stump all the time, there's 3 important issues. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. We've got a plan. It's called Putting South Carolina Back to Work. It's an 8-step, common sense, business principle plan of how we turn this economy around through the private sector, not the government sector, how we empower people, not government. It includes comprehensive tax reform. It has a portion in there about infrastructure. It talks about education and restructure. And I hope we get a chance to really delve into those so I can share those thoughts with you.
Mr. McMaster?
Oh yes, jobs is number one. There's no doubt about it. And ladies and gentlemen, we're at a crossroads where if we don't make the right choices now, we're going to be sunk. We've been sort of drifting now for 12 years because we don't have a plan. I have a strategic plan that'll work. Besides that, I know how to get things done. The state newspaper said I wasn't in politics. I'm not a politician. I'm a prosecutor, but a prosecutor has broad authority in this state. And I've been leading this state with a record of accomplishment, getting things done for the people. I want to lead us to that path to prosperity, and I have the executive experience, maturity, judgment, and credibility to get it done.
Ms. Haley?
You You know, it's important for us to look at, yes, we do have a job problem, but we also have the fact that we don't have the skilled workforce for our South Carolina businesses now. We've got a lot of jobs in South Carolina, and they're having to go out of state and out of country to get that. The first thing that we have to do is acknowledge, and I can tell you as an accountant, we have one of the most band-aided tax structures in the country. We need to make sure that the first thing we do is eliminate the corporate income tax, because when you give businesses cash flow, when you give them profit margins, the first thing they do is hire people. We need a strong commerce director that understands it's about the quality of companies that come in and not quantity. And then we need to make sure that we have to strengthen our technical schools in the state so that we can give the skilled workers to the companies who need them.
All right, our next question will be asked to Congressman Barrett and Jackie Torek with the Morning News.
Congressman Barrett, you've expressed a desire to create economic conditions in South Carolina where the next job is across the street and not across the nation. What specific plans do you have to establish and enhance the infrastructure needed, such as broadband internet access, to lure business and industry to the poorest parts of the state?
Yeah, Jackie, that's a great question, and thank you. I was hoping somebody was going to ask that. As I said in my opening statement, we've got a plan. It's called Putting South Carolina Back to Work. It's an 8-step, common sense, business principle plan of how we turn this economy around through the private sector, not the government sector. The first is comprehensive tax reform. We need a system that's fair, that's flatter, that puts all the options on the table. We've looked at property tax and sales tax and grocery tax, and now cigarette tax. And look at the system that we've got. We need a system where every option is on the table. We have a system that's fair, that's flatter, that encourages businesses and industry to come to South Carolina and helps existing businesses. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, water, sewer. Not only where we're going to put them, ladies and gentlemen, but how we're going to pay for them. And that includes our ports. 1 out of every 10 jobs is directly related to the port. It's a $40 billion multiplier. Being ready when the post-Panamax ships come in, extremely important, and having a governor that's going to roll up his sleeves and be ready. Education. My wife's a first grade school teacher, and I don't think there's any one silver bullet, but no child, listen to me, no child should leave the 3rd grade that's not at or above 3rd grade reading level. To do that, we've got to get dollars to the classroom. For every dollar you spend in education, only 44 cents makes it to the classroom. National average is 65 cents. We've got to make sure those dollars make it to the educational classroom. And the last thing is restructuring. I'd love to see the hand of the governor strengthened, where the lieutenant governor and the governor work on the same ticket, where we have a governor that not only has the responsibility but the authority to make a difference. Bringing South Carolina into the 21st century, not the 18th century. That's how we change jobs.
Mr. McMaster, 30 seconds.
Well, I think we need a leader who knows how to get things done. I've never served in legislative office. This office is Attorney General for now 8 years, is the only office I've held in state government. I think that I know how to get things done. And one thing, you have to use the assets you have, and you have to use the full team. We haven't been doing that for 12 years. When we go recruiting industry around the world, are we encouraging industries here to grow? We need to have the port, agriculture, tourism, the technical colleges, and the tax system. We need to overhaul our tax system, make them fairer, flatter, and lower, but we need to put all that at the table every time and market it globally.
Ms. Haley?
You know, your question was about economic conditions, especially in light of the rural areas. What we need to understand is, first of all, we have to have a tax structure that works. That also includes workers' comp reform and tort reform. But we've got to look at our educational system. We are spending $12,000 a year. It's going through 1,000 people at the Department of Education in 85 school districts before it ever touches a student and teacher in the classroom. And we are only graduating 1 out of every 2 kids in 4 years. 1 out of every 2. We've got to make sure we set up vocational programs starting in the 9th grade, that they are ready for technical schools when they get out of college, so that in these rural areas, we are actually getting the skilled workforce so that we can bring these companies in and know that we can build up those areas so that they're effective.
Mr. Bauer?
We need 4 regional offices for the Department of Commerce. It shouldn't just be in Columbia. The Commerce should be working with the local folks to find out exactly what they need. You need a governor that can travel the world and sell South Carolina, whether it's Nanya Plastics right here in this area, and I've been to Taiwan and visited their home office and built a relationship with them. We need an intermodal port in South Carolina to plan for the future when the Panama Canal is finished in 2014. I've actually been there and met with the shipping companies, also met with the shipping companies in Charleston. You're going to have to start planning for the future, and whether you have to bond it, whether you do a private-public partnership, we need an intermodal port to plan for our future. We also have got to do something about our tax structure in South Carolina. We do everything we can to discourage people from investing in South Carolina. Whether you look at what we charge now on property owned by businesses, because of Act 388, we've discouraged anyone from buying new property. We're putting the burden on the businesses.
Time's up. Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Rusty Ray has the next question. It will be addressed to Attorney General McMaster.
Mr. McMaster, you've made the fight against internet crimes against children and more recently the fight against the federal health care bill and its impact on South Carolinians, some of the hallmarks of your time as Attorney General of the state. What can you do to make economic development for all of South Carolina a hallmark of your time as governor?
Well, as I began to explain a minute ago, in my time as Ronald Reagan's first United States attorney in the country, which is an executive position, and again is my first elected position, that is, as Attorney General, I know that you have to have a team working together that among them know all there is to know about the problem that you're trying to solve, the challenge you're trying to meet. So what I would do with economic development is do something that has not been done before, because we need to reform, that we need to change the way we do it. And we need to have it led by the governor. There needs to be a strategic plan, and I've already published one on how to get there. And you need to have all of these assets. The port we have one of the best ports in the country. It's a deep water port. Our agriculture potential right along the I-95 corridor is second to none, but we're not marketing it globally. And the farmers and those are not getting the kind of information, the data and information and strategies they need. They need to be a part of the working with the Department of Commerce. Tourism, I'd take the parks, recreation, and tourism and separate tourism off, and Parks and Recreation are doing something else. But we have great economic engines in tourism in South Carolina, but we're not promoting them, and they're not coordinating with these others. The technical college system is second to none. We need to get our taxes down. But we need a leader who knows how to get things done. Now, I've shown with the internet predators, other laws I've gotten passed through the General Assembly, I had to fight for some of them pretty hard, but I know how to work with people and get things done. We got to keep the federal government off our back, and that's why I sued them. And we have to see that the things they're not doing, like immigration, we have to step forward and do that, and I know how to enforce those laws.
Thank you, Mr. McMaster. Ms. Haley, 30 seconds.
You know, when we look at economic development, first of all, I will tell you that I will get someone that leads our Commerce Department that really thinks out of the box and understands it's about the quality of companies and not quantity of companies. I will talk with that person on a daily basis. They will meet with our regional directors on a monthly basis. But then let's look at an example. Let's look at Boeing. Boeing was a great win for South Carolina, but Boeing basically came for two reasons. One, because we're a right-to-work state. We keep the unions out. We need to stay that way. But two, because they got tax incentives. 95% of our economy is small businesses. Why aren't we taking care of the businesses we already have? When you go and create that environment, companies will come here not because we smile and take them to dinner, but because it makes sense to their bottom line and it makes sense to their profit margin.
Mr. Bauer?
When you're a business person, you don't just look at taxes. Taxes are a part of it, but every state is now throwing out tax incentives to lure business. When a business comes here, much like Carol Campbell did, you've got to sit down with them and have them a comfort level. Let them know there's going to be capable workforce and that your technical schools will work with them. Let them know that DHEC is not going to hold that project up, and when they're ready to turn dirt, bureaucrats won't stop the project. City and county government have got to be there to let them know that they're ready to work with them. All of these things have a combined entrance to the person that's actually looking at moving here, and they've got to have a comfort level with the person they're working with.
Mr. Barrett?
When I think about economic development, I think of our Palmetto Energy Project. It's a two-pronged attack. First, it taps into the offshore natural gas reserves in South Carolina, 4 billion cubic feet. The National Petroleum Institute says that could be 2,200 jobs and $250 million of royalties that we can use in South Carolina as we see fit. The other side of that equation is nuclear. There's 4 nuclear reactors on the board in South Carolina. To put it in perspective, this year's budget for the state was $5 billion. Those 4 nuclear reactors represented $25 billion investment in South Carolina, which are real jobs, real growth, and real economic opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Next question from Harry Logan with Francis Marion, and it's for State Representative Nikki Haley.
Ms. Haley, if you were elected governor, do you think questions raised about your personal life would affect your ability to recruit jobs and industry to South Carolina?
Not at all, because the questions raised about my personal life aren't true. You know, it's funny how there were no questions brought up until 2 weeks prior to the election and when I suddenly became double-digit leader in the polls. I mean, I think that anybody will tell you that everything I've done in the General Assembly has been pushed for accountability, to really bring out the truth, whether it's through term limits or getting legislators to disclose their income or showing spending online, has been very important. I am will tell you that my husband and I have been proud and faithful to each other for 13 years. I think it is sad. This is South Carolina politics at its worst. I was called by Governor Mitt Romney. I was called by Governor Sarah Palin. I was called by Jenny Sanford. And all three of them said, this is what happens when you start to lead. And it won't get any better. You just fight your way through. What I am proud to say is the phones have not stopped ringing with positive calls. We have run out of yard signs. We have run out of bumper stickers. And everyone has been incredibly supportive. I will lead the way I've always led in the General Assembly, which is not to sit there and please the guys at the State House, but to make sure that I'm working for the people of this state. That's what the people of this state want. I have gone against the General Assembly on a lot of things that they don't like, but that's not going to stop me from fighting. I'm going to continue to do that regardless of what the attacks they keep trying to throw my way.
Mr. Bauer, 30 seconds.
Well, I actually, having run against the governor's son, having run against members of the legislature and against the establishment all my life, they've always supported somebody else. They've pretty much gone after every little bit of my personal life that's been out there, so I don't know what else is left.
Maybe they can find something.
I'm sure they'll try.
Or try. Mr. Barrett.
For the record, Andre Bauer's a good guy, ladies and gentlemen. I'll tell you that.
Thank you.
You know, I abhor what's happening to Ms. Haley, to me with third parties. I mean, it has no place in South Carolina. South Carolinians deserve better and expect more. But unfortunately, character does matter. My dad told me early on, it's not one of the things that matters, it is the only thing that matters. And if there's ever been a time in our history, ladies and gentlemen, where we need leaders above reproach, it's today. Because people look, people pay attention, and we've got to turn the page in South Carolina.
Mr. McMaster.
Well, the governor of all people is always under a microscope, and you have to do the right thing. And we've all been subject to unfounded personal attacks. I've got one newspaper in Columbia that's been following my children around for a couple of weeks now, trying to find something. Unfortunately, Nikki, as you know, it is a part of politics, but it should not be. But I'll tell you what, if the governor does the right thing, if you stand up for the people and you try to attack the problems that we have and work hard, we'll be all right.
Our next question is coming from Jackie Tork, and it will be directed toward Lieutenant Governor Bauer.
Mr. Bauer, your Senior Shield program, which is designed to protect senior citizens from fraud, has been criticized for, among other things, duplicating services offered in the private sector. How do you reconcile that with your calls for a reduction in government-funded public assistance, most notably welfare?
The federal government and the state government actually demanded and required that I do something about senior fraud. Sure, the private sector says they do it, but if so, why is there so much senior fraud in South Carolina? And why did the Joint Assembly on Aging come together and say, Lieutenant Governor, please do something? Yancey McGill, a senator in this very area, his mother was cheated out of thousands of dollars, and the people came together and said, somebody's got to take up the cause. So we did take up the cause, and now the taxpayers actually get a check back. Every year when people sign up for this program, they actually get the money back now. And so we've got private businesses having to be vetted before they do business with these seniors. And now seniors actually have somewhere they can go to make sure that they have a comfort level second to none when they do business with people that are going to be in their home. They don't have to worry about somebody taking advantage of them. And that's what government's supposed to do. And those seniors are now better off and they're protected because of it.
30 seconds, Mr. Barrett.
You know, in my government experience, I've never seen anything the government can do better than the private sector. But the fact of the matter is we've got to do everything we can within our power, within the government, to streamline the process. We've got 4 educational budgets in South Carolina: EIA, EAA, EFA, and First Steps. You can't tell me that's effective. We've got 46 counties, 85 school districts, 64 different funding sources. The time has come, ladies and gentlemen, to spend the taxpayer dollars wisely, those precious resources, not duplicate services, but figure out how we can do it better.
Mr. McMaster.
Well, government, especially the government in Washington, is growing bigger and bigger, taking more and more money, putting us into perpetual debt. We may have already been left off, taken off the cliff, and things have gotten worse and they can't do anything. The same is true for a lot of state government. I guarantee you, if I'm governor, I'll be using that veto pen. We will not raise taxes. We will not grow government. We will streamline government. We will also pass my plan to abolish parole and establish a middle of court system that will save us hundreds of millions of dollars, and we'll work with private industry every day.
Ms. Haley?
You know, I can tell you as an accountant, one of the first things I'm going to do is audit every single one of the agencies in my cabinet, because government tends to pass a lot of programs and they never go back and see if these programs actually work. They never follow through. We will go into every one of those agencies. We will start with zero and we will say, what do we have to have, and work our way up. The second thing we need to do is we always need to understand that the private sector works best all the time. They are more efficient, the quality is better, and they are more effective than government. Government tends to mess up more than it fixes. We need to remember that. What the private sector can do, we should let them do, and then limit the rest of that to government.
Thank you, Ms. Haley. Rusty Ray has the next question for Congressman Gresham Barrett.
Congressman, you've mentioned a couple of times tonight already an 8-step plan, and you even touched on this topic. What can you do to continue to maximize South Carolina's network of interstate highways and the Port of Charleston, which we've mentioned here tonight, and the Port of Georgetown for that matter, and other manufacturing infrastructure components to continue to grow the economic opportunities for workers here in South Carolina?
Yeah, thank you, Rusty. Well, you know, part of the 8-step plan that we've worked, of course, it's got comprehensive tax reform, a system that's fair, that's flatter, that helps business, but infrastructure is extremely important. In this area, one of the major infrastructure, and I've said this in the upstate, I'll say it down here, is I-73. It should be the #1 project in South Carolina. What's good for the lower part of the state is good for the upper part of the state. We're too small to fight about it, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm very blessed. I live within 15 to 17 miles from the I-85 corridor. But you know, what about the I-95 corridor, the 77, or the 26, or the 20? We can duplicate that process across this state, but it takes forward thinking. It takes planning. I'll give you a perfect example. Volkswagen came to my district and they wanted to put a plant there. We told them we'd put them in the roads, the bridges, the water, the sewer, a 2.5-year project. They said, that's wonderful. We're going to Tennessee, and you know why? Because they signed the contract one day, started turning dirt the next. We need a holistic plan to be prepared when businesses and industry come looking. That has to include the ports. It's a $40 billion multiplier. We're 18 months away from making major infrastructure decisions, so we're ready for the post-Panamax ships. And I talked to Mayor Keith Summey about a month and a half ago, and he said, Gresham, I talked to 6 government officials and I get 6 different answers. We've got to have a governor that's going to roll up his sleeve and put people in the same room. Take CSX and Norfolk Southern. Lock the doors and say, gentlemen, ladies, we're not leaving till we solve this problem. Because when infrastructure is right, the whole state can grow. We can gain that growth. But it's not just the Port of Charleston. It's the Jasper Port and also the Georgetown Port.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mayor Summey, by the way, Mayor of North Charleston. Mr. McMaster, 30 seconds.
Yes, sir. Well, the Charleston port can take post-Panamax boats now at high tide. Georgetown has enormous opportunity, and Jasper as well will be there when we maximize Charleston. We all agree on the basic ingredients that we have. The difference with me is I see that we can think big, we can think globally, and I think there's no end to what we can do. But we've got to work together, conservatives, to accomplish real change. Sanford years have showed us what can happen when you don't do that. I'm a positive conservative leader who has gotten things done in the executive branch, and I'm ready to continue that and expand it from the governor's office.
All right, Ms. Haley.
Your question was about ports and how we're going to maximize interstate highways. And the one thing we need to do is learn from Georgia, because they ran with it. And the reason they ran with it was Governor Perdue would greet consumers at the ports and say, thank you for your business. And then he would walk away. Then you had a ports board who understood they needed strength. The legislature would strengthen them, and then they would walk away and let the ports do their business. In South Carolina, we've had a governor that wasn't as engaged in the ports as he should have been, and we've got a legislature who won't let go of the ports board so that they can do their job. We need to understand we need strong ports. We need to make sure we have distribution centers. We need rail. To expand our interstate highways, we need rail so that we are not congesting our interstates with the trucks. By doing those things, that's how we will maximize the amount of freight that comes in and out, maximize the ports.
Mr. Bauer?
To be the leader in the ports, we have got to have an intermodal port. I went and met with JAFSA when the governor couldn't go. I went to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and met with them. I don't foresee them doing anything in the near future, and so we've got to plan ahead and find someone that will build that intermodal port. We ought to have specialty ports. Georgetown, Jasper, we ought to make one of them an agricultural port and be the best agricultural port in the entire United States. Hone our skills, make us the most efficient and effective. And lastly, the dirtiest fuel you can burn. If we really want to be environmentally friendly, we do something about diesel number 5, which is what container ships burn. Let our farmers produce a fuel that saves us from tearing the environment up, and give them an incentive to come to South Carolina and burn that fuel versus burning dirty fuel in another port.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Our next question from Harry Logan from Francis Marion, and it is for State Attorney General Henry McMaster.
Our next question comes from the Voice of the Voter Project. This is from Roderick McClary, who would like to know what you would do to better educate the people of South Carolina.
Well, good question, Harry, because that's where we are really falling short. Unfortunately, our education system from top to bottom is almost dysfunctional, I believe. There's very little accountability. I'm for choice and education, excellence, good schools, and new ideas. But here's the problem we have. If you have a governor who wants to do something about education, he really has no direct authority other than the power to persuade and, of course, that veto pen. Then you have a superintendent who's elected separately who may or may not agree with the governor on things, but he doesn't have power over the 17 members of the State Board of Education, all who are elected by groups of legislators from around the state. Most people don't know who's on the board. Below that, you have 85 school districts, 86 if you count the charter school district, that's statewide. And they do have some authority, but they're not compelled to do much from above. Below that, you have the principals and the teachers. That's where the rubber is meeting the road, right there. But they're so filled up filling out federal forms and trying to get those kind of things done, they can't teach. So the wonder is not that we're not doing better, the wonder is we're doing as well as we are. What I would do, and I differ from my colleagues on this table and others, I would focus on early childhood education. We need to do a lot of things in high school. But if we can't get them up to that first grade, and then reading by the third grade, and then keep in the ninth grade so they don't drop out, and then on out to an academic college or to a technical college, both of which we have plenty of, we'll never go get ahead. That's what I would do.
Ms. Haley, 30 seconds.
You know, I was born and raised in a rural area where we didn't know what we didn't have. I lived in Orangeburg where they spent more time in discipline than they ever did in the classroom. And now I represent Lexington County where every public school is like a private one. You go into my schools in Lexington and there's a smart board in every classroom. You go into my schools in Bamberg and they wouldn't know what a smart board is. We have got to reform our education funding formula. We've got to reform the way we fund education in this state. When we start to do that, including merit-based pay for teachers, understanding that we need to incentivize businesses to job shadow and mentor. We're going to have to start thinking outside of the box and understand it is all of our communities getting involved, but we have got to reform the way we fund education if we're going to see any changes in the inequities in the state.
Mr. Bauer?
As a substitute teacher for 4 years, I can tell you, sure, the money ought to be in the classroom, but don't be fooled. We continue to hear it's about money. Folks, if you don't put discipline back in the classroom, if you don't get parents in these struggling schools back engaged in their child's behavior and their child's well-being and their child's education, you will never fix the education system in South Carolina. We have some schools that are great, but those are schools that are filled with parents that are engaged. You go to other schools and they can't make it work no matter how much money we pour in it. My right-hand man graduated from Dillon High School where the president said it was one of the worst schools in the country and went and graduated Furman in 4 years. And like me, he came from a broken home and qualified for free lunch. But his mother decided education was first and foremost her priority for her young person, and he got it done.
Mr. Barrett?
My wife's a first grade school teacher. She says congressmen and first graders have a lot in common, by the way. No child should leave the third grade that's not at or above third grade reading level, ladies and gentlemen. Even the conservatives and the liberals agree on that. That's a long-term goal, and we can fix that. But to do that, we've got to get the dollars to the classroom. We also need discipline in the classroom. We need to have the ability for teachers and principals to decide whether that child needs to leave the classroom. We also need school choice. My children were homeschooled. My children went to a Christian school, and they all proudly graduated a public school. One size in education does not fit all.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Jackie Torek has the next question, and that's going to be directed to State Representative Nikki Haley.
Representative Haley, my next question also comes from our Voice of the Voter Project. And Earl Moore would like to know where you stand on the state's gambling laws, which outlaw all games of cards and dice. His specific question is, would you support repealing them to make gambling legal and possibly create jobs along with additional revenue for the state?
You know, I think there's a lot of things that we need to focus on. One is creating good jobs. One is making sure that we have 44,000 open jobs in this state that our South Carolina businesses need to fill, and they're going out of state and out of country to get it. That's where I want my focus to be. I don't want my focus to be on creating gambling jobs or anything else. I don't think we need to compromise where South Carolina is in the name of jobs or revenue. I think it is not about what you spend, it is about how you spend. It is not about what the environment is, it is about where the environment needs to go. You know, when you're in business, the one thing you do is a business plan. You don't just handle things for today and handle crisis modes for today. You look at year 3 and 5 and 7 and say, where do we want to go as a state? That is where you will see me go as your governor, is to turn around and make sure that we understand there are other ways. We don't have to compromise our state in any way whatsoever to bring good soil conditions to this state, to bring good jobs to this state, and to bring good quality businesses to this state.
Mr. Bauer, 30 seconds.
No.
Good answer, Andre.
Mr. Barrett, you get 30 seconds.
I'll take 30 of Andre's. Nobody fought video poker any harder than I did. Nobody fought the lottery. Lottery's a law. I can't do anything about that. But absolutely not. I will not do anything that will allow any type of gaming in South Carolina.
Mr. McMaster.
The answer is no. Gambling is outlawed by our Constitution, and we should not attempt to bring it back in any way. Governor Campbell had it right. He said those aren't the kind of good jobs that we want to be known for. And it's a little inconsistent to hear we're concentrating on these children in school, and yet we're making money out of gambling, which we know does not lead to much and causes a whole lot of problems. But back to that previous question, because education is so important, I ought to appoint the superintendent of education. I'd make the State Board of Education advisory, and I'd work every day to see that the children are educated in this state, because that's where the answer is. That's where the future is.
Thank you, Mr. McMaster. Rusty Ray from News 13 has the next question. It's directed to Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer.
And this question also comes from our Voice of the Voter project with News 13. A lot of our viewers and readers are tuned into the hot button issues in this nation and this state. And Jonathan Shelton wants to know if South Carolina is faced with the same immigration issues that Arizona was faced with and is still dealing with. As governor, how would you work with Congress to deal with that issue?
Well, Jan Brewer and I are actually friends. She was lieutenant governor before she was governor. We've got to address the real problem, folks, and nobody wants to talk about it. They talk about it as if it's just illegal immigration problems that we deal with. We deal with the fact that there are jobs out there that Americans no longer want to do. Let's call a spade a spade. We look time and time again, and there are people now that get so much from the government, they will not do a labor-intensive job, whether it's picking peaches, hanging sheetrock, working in a hotel. The reason why we have an immigration problem is because we can't find people that want to do those jobs, and nobody wants to talk about it. You know what I'm saying is the truth, whether you want to agree to it or not. And until you get people that will get off their duff, that are able-bodied people, you're not going to continue to have an immigration problem, whether it's legal or illegal. Nobody's going to enforce it. Sure, we should enforce the laws on the books. South Carolina has the second toughest laws on immigration in the entire United States. Until Arizona passed theirs, we had the toughest. But again, we need to really go back and say, why do we have this problem? And the reason why is we continue to give more and more way to able-bodied people. We've got to bring finality to these programs. New Jersey, for example, said 5 years and you're off welfare. If you have a child while you're on welfare, then you've got to give the father's name. If you don't get the benefits. And if you give the father's name, we're going after the father to get that money and reimbursing the state. We've got to look at why we have an immigration problem. The real problem is government giveaways have become so good that people have chosen to take those versus working.
Mr. Barrett, 30 seconds.
God bless the governor of Arizona. She's trying to take back her state. The fact of the matter is the federal government has failed to enforce immigration laws. We need to do three things. Number one, pass an Arizona-style common sense immigration law. Number two, we need to make sure we hold our employers accountable with a system where they can verify legals and illegals. And number three, we need to fully implement a 287G program. We've got 3 counties in South Carolina that are doing it right now. It's a program where we train our local and state law enforcement officials on how to enforce immigration laws so we, South Carolina, can be the masters of our own destiny.
Mr. McMaster.
Yes, it's a problem, and we've got a problem with the Obama administration, of course, and with Congress. They're passing things like the individual health care mandate that's a threat to our sovereignty and our liberty, and then doing nothing about immigration. So Jan Brewer did the right thing and passed a law that made it a crime. We have a law that punishes employers. Our new law, one introduced by Senator Larry Martin, will finish the loop on that and give us the best immigration laws on the country. I issued an opinion last week saying it's unconstitutional. I expect it to get passed, and I know how to enforce laws. I'm the only one here that has been in the business of enforcing laws, and we'll get them enforced.
Ms. Haley.
You know, I think that Arizona did what they had to because the federal government failed to react. And I applaud Arizona for doing that. I will tell you that I am a co-sponsor of the Arizona-style legislation. I will push for it to be that way. But let's also look at the fact that the immigration law that South Carolina passed 2 years ago, when they went to go look at it last year with the stimulus, there was not the first dollar put in that prosecution fund. It was one more example of how government passed something and never went back and made sure that they did what they were supposed to. It's all about holding government government accountable. Had those prosecution dollars been in there, we would have already been able to see reports and see accountability and see whether we were handling the immigration law properly or not.
Thank you, Ms. Haley. Harry Logan has the next question, and it will be addressed to Congressman Gresham Barrett.
Mr. Barrett, what bill or bills did you get passed in Congress that have helped create jobs or bring economic development to South Carolina?
Well, I'll tell you, Harry, I think part of the bills that I helped pass was extending the Bush tax cuts. You know, we've got a federal government right now that wants to be, for lack of better words, a nanny state. We've got a federal government that wants to come in and tell you who to be and what to be and how to be it, how you're going to get paid, how much you're going to make, and more than that, where you're going to get your health care. Listen, I've been in Washington for the last 7.5 years, and I can tell you straight-faced, sitting here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that the answers to this nation's problems are not in Washington, D.C. There's a little amendment in the Constitution called the 10th Amendment, which is a states' rights amendment. And Jan Brewer knows that. The governor of Arizona understands that. It's time we had a governor or governors to stand up and say, you know what, we're not doing it anymore. We're taking our country back. I'm working on a little bill right now with Jim DeMint called devolution. It's a real simple idea. Believe it or not, South Carolina is a donor state when it comes to transportation dollars. For every dollar we send up in road tax money, we only get back 93 or 94 cents. This idea says, you know what, federal government, you take care of the interstates because those are yours, but you know what, we'll take care of our rest. We keep our own dollars and we solve our own problems. And that's what states are for. States should be the hotbed of experimentation and freedom. And we've got a federal government that wants to come in and tell us, empowering people, not government. Government has a role. That role is to help set that table, but once we set that table, then we need to get the heck out of the way.
Mr. McMaster.
Well, in this position for 8 years, I've done a number of things. One, I've got the water case going. This could protect our precious water supply from North Carolina taking too much. It's in the U.S. Supreme Court, and we could do the same thing with Georgia. But I've gotten a lot of legislation passed, mainly in the public safety area, the Internet Predator Network. We got that done. Going after the wife beaters, we got that done. I got securities legislation passed. I got environmental legislation passed, gang legislation passed, and methamphetamine. Those are all major pieces of legislation. Had to fight like the Dickens for some, but I got them done. In fact, I've gotten more pieces of major legislation passed than my colleagues here combined, and I'm not even in a legislative body.
Ms. Haley, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I served on the Workers' Comp Conference Committee to where we worked as hard as we could to make sure small businesses had stronger workers' comp laws. That's directly related to bringing jobs. I served on the Coastal Insurance Conference Committee because we saw so many investors pulling their money out on the coast because the insurance had gotten high. And so that was another way of keeping jobs. And now my fight right now that we are 2 or 3 days away from is making sure that every single legislator has to vote on the record. Because when you can see the spending habits of your legislators, when you can hold them accountable, we can make sure that we have a good government for the state of South Carolina.
Mr. Bauer.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've traveled to over 20 countries as your lieutenant governor, and not once have you even paid for a cup of coffee. It was paid for all privately, and I have continued to meet with businesses that want to come to South Carolina. Right in this very area, a company is going to be coming and putting a solar university that I met with and talked to. Sonic Automotive, a Fortune 500 company. I sat down with them just a few weeks ago because they're now interested in moving their corporate headquarters to South Carolina. Nobody from South Carolina other than myself has even met with them. I met with Kenny Aboul out of Charlotte, North Carolina, who wants to put a solar farm in South Carolina. I've already put him in touch with BIPEC and several different counties he's already visited. So I've been doing a lot of things in economic development as the number 2 guy in the state when the governor hadn't been able to fill that duty.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bauer. Jackie Torek has the next question for South Carolina Attorney General Henry McMaster.
Mr. McMaster, you said you're committed to a new knowledge-based economy, citing the state's 3 research universities as catalysts for reaching that goal. What role will Francis Marion University, as well as other colleges in the PD, play in your plan?
They'll be integrally involved, and they'll know that they are integrally involved, and there's a lot of talent at this place. I see Dr. Carter sitting right there. We have all sorts of talented people in our colleges. I differ a little from some of my colleagues, is I don't want to close any of these schools down. We have 33 public supported institutions, either 2 or 4 year here in South Carolina. We ought to use them all. And we're not doing it. There's some people want to cut back. For example, in Sumter, you have a USC branch right next to a technical college. Some people see that as duplication. I see that as opportunity. I don't want to close them down. I want to fill them up. because I know that the answer is getting children through school and getting them educated. That's the only way we're going to get into this new knowledge-based economy that we have all the assets for. With the 3 major research universities, every time you see great economic prosperity around the country, every time you see a great research university involved in there somewhere, and you see a network of educational institutions that are pushing people to the top. The personal pathways to success that was the trail blazed here by Don Harriet is what we ought to follow. But we got to get those children on the first rung of that ladder in early childhood education. Be sure they're reading by the 3rd grade and move them on out either to academic college or technical college. If we do that with all the innovative businesses and industries that we have here, if we form a network where the governor is leading that charge, we can compete with the whole world.
For those of you at home, when he referenced Dr. Carter, that was Dr. Fred Carter, who's the president of Francis Marion, where we are tonight. 30 seconds now for Ms. Haley.
You know, I think the answer for Francis Marion and for so many others is to make sure that we hold all of higher education institutions accountable. If you take state funds, the way we decide your funding is based on in-state versus out-of-state students. How many dollars get inside the classroom? Whether your programs are actually helping South Carolina businesses. We don't need to fund schools of higher ed based on the number of lobbyists at the State House. It needs to be because they are efficient and effective for the students and the families that pay for those students to go there, that it's actually working so that the schools can be effective in terms of helping with our South Carolina businesses, and that we make sure that the money going into the classroom is right. I think it's all about accountability, not just with Francis Marion, but with every institution of higher ed.
Mr. Bauer.
I've actually been to Francis Marion several times in the last year. Actually, I talked to Dr. Carter when it looked like at one time I may have to take over for the governor for his leadership. I called him and asked his advice. Francis Marion is providing a vehicle that so many people in this community need. Quite frankly, they can't take all the students that would like to come to this university. And that is what the role of so many of these universities throughout the state are, is to educate our young people and provide them new opportunities that they wouldn't have without it. And so I actually, when I was on the MAP commission, voted to keep all the colleges and universities in South Carolina open because we have that demand, and some people can't make it to the flagship universities in other areas of the state anyway. So what he's providing here is a wonderful vehicle.
Mr. Barrett.
There shouldn't be a quarter that goes by where the governor's not sitting down with the heads of his research institutions, with all of his university and colleges across the state, to talk about how we can work together, how we can better serve South Carolina, how we can co-op our 2-year institutions, our technical schools, a lot of people call them. I call them community colleges. We need to work together and figure out how we can collaborate. Not only with that, but we've got K through 12 schools that are working with our 2-year institutions, figuring out collectively how to spend the taxpayer dollars wisely and move education forward in South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Our next question will be directed from Rusty Ray of News 13 to Representative Nikki Haley.
Mrs. Haley, you've won the support of the Tea Party and one of its favorites just recently, former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. But what could you do right away as governor of this state to work within the existing power structure in Columbia, in Washington, and others to make sure South Carolina gets what it needs to continue its growth in a global marketplace?
You know, I've fought for the last 6 years for people to know the power of their voice. And I've also fought for elected officials to remember who it is that they work for. The key is I will do a couple of things. One, I will have an agenda every year. I will take that agenda to the General Assembly and I'll say pick 3 major items. Whatever 3 items they pick, I will go and tell all of the public about it, because I want them to know about legislation before it passes and not after. And then I will work with them from the committee level to the House level to the Senate level, so by the time it gets to my desk, it will have been a team effort. For all of those legislators that push for good government, pro-business reforms, I'll go into every one of their districts and praise them for it. For all of those legislators that go against good government, pro-business reforms, I'm going to go into all of their districts and hold their hand to the fire, because the people deserve to know that too. But let me just tell you how I work. When we were dealing with on-the-record voting, the bill came up and one of the legislators in committee came up and said, "We just want you to know we're going to kill your bill today." And I said, "Okay, I just want you to know what your options are. If you kill this bill today, I'm going to go out and say it's very clear the Republican leadership doesn't understand what it means to be accountable to the people they represent. If you pass this bill today, I'm going to go out and say it's very clear the Republican leadership understands the importance of being accountable to the people they represent." The person that was going to kill it moved for its passage. When you give them the option to do the right thing, when you let them know circumstances before they happen, the legislature 70% of the time will make the right decision. 30% of the time we might fight a little bit. But at the end of the day, we are going to get things done. Our days of debating are over. Now it is time for action.
Mr. Bauer, 30 seconds.
Well, first off, I'd say that I don't think she has all the Tea Party. I mean, Mike Huckabee and a lot of the Tea Party folks are supporting me. But secondly, I would say the most successful governor in the history of the state of South Carolina was a guy named Carroll Campbell. And he had one of the same things or experiences I did, and that's serving in the House and Senate. If you want to see somebody effectively get things through the General Assembly, it would be somebody that has served in both chambers. Those chambers are vastly different. And if you look at an office that historically had no powers, that was the Lieutenant Governor's office. It now has a $40 million agency that has given money back every year to the Budget Control Board, including part of my pay, and we got it done through working with the legislature.
Mr. Barrett?
You know, Andre's right about one thing. I think in my lifetime, I'm almost 50 years old, there's never been a better governor than Governor Carroll Campbell in a legislative state. And I think about what he did, the real change he instituted. You don't have to lose your conservative principles to be a good leader. It's working together. That's what we did with our Putting South Carolina Back to Work plan. We had legislators and economic developers and professors across this state to formulate a plan so when it goes forward, it is our plan, not my plan. And that's how you have to govern, and that's how you change ideals.
And I'm only right about one thing.
Mr. McMaster.
Well, I think Governor Campbell did a superior job, and so did David Beasley, who is a son of the PD, by the way. And they did things the same way. They were strong leaders, and they kept most of the debate behind the scenes. That is, most of the fighting, most of the arm twisting, all of those kind of things were behind the scenes. I think they recognized that an effective leader has to be one who can get things done. You have to stick to your conservative principles. But I'm afraid that the Sanford years have taught us, and I'm not blaming anybody, but the Sanford years have taught us that you got to work with people in order to get things done. And I'm the one in the executive branch who has worked with people to get things done for 8 years. I'd like to continue that as your governor.
All right, thank you, Mr. McMaster. We have another question now from our Voice of the Voter project, and each candidate has 1 minute to answer this question. Our Voice of the Voter question comes from Richard Gregory from Myrtle Beach, and he wants to know, how much funding will you give to the Interstate 73 project to help the economies of northeastern South Carolina diversify and get better? And Richard Gregory from Myrtle Beach, we thank you for that question. And Lieutenant Governor Bauer, you get the first crack at it.
Well, I would say this. We need to look at where we're getting funding from. We should close our rest areas, lease them out, let the private sector run rest areas, let them run the visitor center, find new ways to create revenue without asking the taxpayers for more money. We can come up with creative ways to come up with new revenue. And I would say this, the PD and Myrtle Beach or Horry subsidize so much of the state. We take so much money from them and don't send any of it back, or very little. We've got to do more to send more of that back to one of the crown jewels of South Carolina, one of the areas that brings so much revenue in if we want to continue to see that revenue come in through tourism. And so that money's got to come back. But I would look at all kinds of things where we waste money. We pay an architect every time we build a new elementary school. Do y'all realize that? Or any school. Why not build template drawings, much like a Walmart or a Waffle House or a Burger King, and over and over and over use that drawing? You'd save over $500,000 for every school building. Then your building costs would come down by about 30% on every one of those buildings. So you immediately start coming up with new revenue sources, and that can be passed on to I-73 corridor, and that's how we're going to have to get creative, because we know we're going to have a lack of funding again next year, another $1 billion cut.
I-73, Congressman Barrett.
I said earlier in my comments, the #1 project in South Carolina needs to be I-73. It's more than an economic engine for South Carolina, which it is tremendous, but it's a safety route too. If I'm blessed enough to be governor, or anybody on the stage, imagine if a hurricane hits during the middle of peak season, we've got to make sure we can keep our citizens safe and secure. When we're talking about securing funding, one of the things that I'm excited about is the Palmetto Energy Project. It's our project of how we can bring jobs and growth to South Carolina. There's 4 billion cubic feet of natural gas off the coast of South Carolina, ladies and gentlemen. The National Petroleum Institute says it could be 2,200 jobs and $250 million of royalties if you equate what's happening in the Gulf Coast. That's money that we could use as we see fit. What I would propose is that we use 70% for infrastructure, 20% for law enforcement, and 10% to roll back into the economy through alternatives or renewable energies. Also, you couple that with nuclear energy, you're talking about a tremendous tax base that we can use for that infrastructure.
Mr. McMaster.
Well, I'd do whatever it takes, because until we get I-73 there, Myrtle Beach will never reach its full potential. The Grand Strand will never reach its full potential. It is just about impossible sometimes to get in or get out at any time of night and day. But that's primarily a federal responsibility. There's another example of where Washington's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. That thing should have been built a long time ago. What I would do as your governor is I would work as hard as I could with our congressional delegation. Again, you got to work with people and see to it that that thing is funded, because after all, we're sending the money up there and we're not getting it back. We're one of the donor states. We need to be sure that we get more money back. We need to have I-73 because that will open up that economic engine. It's opened in Charleston. It's opened in Beaufort. You can get to those places. Greenville has become an economic engine because of enlightened leadership and the kind of team approach that I'm talking about. So, and also I would take Department of Natural Resources and give them parks and recreation, keep tourism as a separate agency. And tourism needs to sell Myrtle Beach every day globally and our other economic engines.
Ms. Haley.
You know, I-73 is important from a couple of different levels. First of all, tourism is our #2 industry, and we need to understand we've got to do whatever we can to grow it. Everybody sees the complications of getting to Myrtle Beach, and when you see that, you see the loss of jobs, you see the loss of economic development, you see the loss of companies coming in because it's hard for them to do that. And so I think what you will see me do is meet with our federal delegation every single quarter so that we understand exactly where we are with that project, and then go back to our state and understand again, it's not what you spend, it's how you spend. It is priorities. It is understanding that if we think tourism is important, if we think jobs are important, then we need to show it. And we need to show it by the way that we spend, and we need to show it by the way that we act.
Because of time constraints, we're going to cut the closing statements to 1 minute apiece for all of our candidates. And we'll start with Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm running for governor to take on the tough issues. There's a lot of great folks running for governor, but most of them don't want to talk about the politically incorrect things that are going on in South Carolina and in this country. Somebody's got to start having this discussion. Look, we know schools are struggling in South Carolina. We continue to throw money at it. It's not fixing the problem. We're going to have to do something to get those parents back engaged. We've lost them somewhere along the way. Whether you look at these social programs, we can't afford them anymore. The first time in history of this country we had the smallest amount of paychecks coming from private business and the largest number of people receiving government goods and services in the history of this country, even during the Depression. We better wake up and have these discussions. If you look at economic development, I'm the only one that's been out there doing it for 8 years, and I did it with no funding from the state. I'm the only one on this stage that gave up their government paycheck and didn't have to spend all the money that my agency was given. 1 year I gave back over $400,000. I can tell you I can make the budget work. I'm a businessman first and foremost, and I think that speaks volumes when you have to deal with what government is continuing to pose on the small business owner today. Thank you for being here tonight, and I hope you'll give me your vote.
3rd District Congressman Gresham Barrett, 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in God, and I know with Him all things are possible. And I believe if we're going to take this nation back, we're going to do it one state at a time. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be here tonight. You want to see a state where your sons and daughters can graduate and take jobs in Florence or Columbia or my hometown of Westminster, not Charlotte or Atlanta or Washington, D.C., where the next job is across the street, not across the nation, where small business and entrepreneurs are the heart and soul of this economy, not government. We've got our best days ahead of us. We need a leader that can pull South Carolina together. I have been blessed to be a congressman from South Carolina for the last 7.5 years, and I would be honored to be your governor. And tonight, I ask for your support and your vote. God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. South Carolina Attorney General Henry McMaster.
Well, from the upstate to the Midlands, from the mountain to the sea, South Carolina is one wonderful sight to behold. And right here in the PD, we see it every day. We are blessed with talented people, innovative people, plentiful resources, and I believe we can achieve any dream that we set our minds to. I have a plan to put South Carolina back on the path to prosperity. And of the candidates, and they're good candidates, I believe that I am the one who has the executive leadership experience, a record of accomplishment, working with the legislature, sometimes fighting them, sometimes pulling them, but a record of accomplishment and the maturity, the judgment, and the credibility with the legislature, the other institutions, and the business community to get it done. As governor, I'll lower taxes, recruit high-paying jobs, and reignite our economic engines. So I want to ask you to join me. I believe our new day is about to begin, And I want us all to work together to show the world what South Carolina can do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now State Representative Nikki Haley from Lexington.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having us here. You know, the elections of 2010 are going to matter on the state and federal level because we have seen a lot of Republicans who learn the talking points but haven't learned the conservative actions associated with the talking points. When I grew up in my family's business, the one thing we consistently noticed was how hard it was to make a dollar and how easy it was for government to take it. We need to now make government understand that people pay this money in and how we spend it matters. I can tell you I'm the only one on this panel that has opposed the stimulus package because all it did was run up the credit card debt, and 2 years from now we will have less money to pay for it. We are going to be in a budget crisis and you're going to need an accountant to help us get through it, but we will do that. I will close by saying this. I'm a woman that understands that through the grace of God, with Him all things are possible. I'm the daughter of immigrant parents that reminded us every day how blessed we were to live in this country. I'm the sister of a man who fought in Desert Storm, and I still remember what it was like when we didn't know if he'd come home. I'm the wife of a husband that puts on a military uniform every day and loves his job. I'm the mother of 2 children in public schools, and I care about what their education looks like, and I care about what kind of government they're going to have. But I'm a legislator that knows what good government is, and I want the people of this state to know what that feels like. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ms. Haley. Thank you, Mr. McMaster, Congressman Barrett, Mr. Bauer. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service as well to our state and to our country. And speaking of thank yous, we want to take some time right now to express our gratitude of all the folks here at Francis Marion University tonight, especially Dr. Fred Carter and his wife and also his entire staff at this fine school. We also want to thank our other partners in our Voice of the Voter debates on News 13 WBTW, Dr. David DeCenzo and his team at Coastal Carolina University in Conway. Many of them are with us tonight as well. We also want to thank them. And remember, Coastal Carolina will take center stage in just under 48 hours from now as the Democratic gubernatorial candidates take part in our second Voice of the Voter debate, and that will be on campus at Coastal Carolina at Wheelwright Auditorium. That debate also scheduled for Thursday night, 7 o'clock. It will be broadcast live on WBTW News 13, online on our website, scnow.com, and again nationally on C-SPAN, and that will be 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We also want to thank you, our audience here at the Chapman Auditorium at the McNair Science Building at FMU. Great job. You heard from the candidates. Now it's up to you and all the folks watching to have your voice heard at the ballot box next Tuesday. Exercise your right as a citizen and vote. It is so important. The South Carolina primaries are June 8th. From all of us at News 13, the Morning News, and scnow.com, thank you for watching, and good night from Francis Marion University in Florence.
Thursday, 3 Democrats face off in South Carolina.